For me, this is an exciting time to be able to introduce one of my heroes, a person who has helped me in so many ways and I know has helped many of you as well. A person who kind of sees through what everyone else says and he's able to say what really is going to happen, even if it might be unpleasant. So I want you to get ready for this person who's going to talk to us about the Greater Depression, which we have entered, he says, and how he's going to tie that into technology, how we see what's going along, and how you will be able to emerge from that less damaged than most, and why. He's going to talk about a number of different issues, and he is a person that has commanded a lot of attention and respect from many people, including me, for many, many years. He is one of my heroes, as I said, and I'd like you to join me in welcoming Doug Casey.
Okay, this is good. A nice tight crowd. That means that I can pretty much say what I feel like, but I would anyway. Oh yeah? Oh, what should I do? Because it's a video thing. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, if you snooze, you lose, so forget about it. Okay, guys, so friendly greetings and a warm hello. And what I want to talk to you about today is the Greater Depression and when it's going to happen and how it's going to be. And I want to take you from the early Paleolithic to 20 or 30 years from now, when the whole character of life itself changes. At least it will, in my opinion. So, where should we start? Let me start with Western civilization, which, in my view, is the only civilization that's worth a hill of beans in the entire history of the world. I'm not a multiculturalist. Most of these other cultures don't have anything to offer. Yes, they did some interesting things. And the Indians developed yoga and spicy food, and the Chinese did Tai Chi and Taoism, and there must be something else that they did in those 5 millennia. But I'm only really interested in Western civilization because it's the only civilization that shares the values that I happen to have. What are those? They're values like liberty, personal freedom, free markets, free thought, capitalism, science, scientific progress. That's what Western civilization is all about, and none of the others are. So, how does this relate to the Greater Depression that I told you we are about to enter? Let's go back to 1913. I believe that was the peak year for Western civilization. Everything was advancing all over the world, and then things changed in 1913 with World War I, but other things like the income tax and central banking, which started to become popular then. The peak of American civilization, which is different, was later, and I think that came in someplace in the 1946 to 1959 timeframe. A lot of people are unaware that when the last depression ended in 1946, the U.S. was not just on top of the world, it was on top of the world by almost an order of magnitude. This country produced 80% of the world's vehicles, 80% of the world's aircraft, had all the world's skyscrapers, everything that happened in the world in science and technology and everything happened in the U.S. Maybe the peak year came in 1959 with the 1959 Cadillac convertible. That kind of showed what America was all about in those days. But by 1971, things changed. We were already, relative to other countries who were catching up, we were just another country by 1971, and since 1971, even using the government's own statistics, which are always optimistic and are not to be trusted, the average standard of living of the average guy has actually been going down in relative terms, and actually, perhaps in absolute terms, notwithstanding advances in technology. Right now, from having by far, not even a second place, highest standard of living in the world at its peak back in the 50s, now the U.S., and it depends on who's looking at the numbers and crunching them, is about 12th in the world in standard of living and dropping. So I think that's going to continue. In fact, I'll go so far as to say that things are only as good as they are right now in the United States because of two things. And they're both monetary, actually. One is borrowed money. You know, people throw out these numbers about debt. Well, why is that important? I'll tell you why high levels of debt are important. Because when you have savings, it means that you have produced more than you've consumed, and you've set aside the difference in savings. Okay, that builds capital. And in order to have technological advances and to provide for your future, you need that capital, you need the savings. You can't consume something that you haven't produced. So savings are good. Debt is the opposite of savings. Debt means one or two things. You're either borrowing and consuming capital that other people have produced in the past, and you borrow it, or you're mortgaging your future at interest. That's why debt is bad, okay? So when people mention high levels of debt, see it that way. And I think most of the debt in the world is consumer debt. Now you can, listen, when people have savings, that savings is available to borrow. There's two ways you can use the borrowings. Productively, for production or consumption. Production would be things like building a factory or planting a new field or developing a new technology. That's one thing. Consumption is the other thing. Buy a bigger house, take a vacation, live high off the hog. Okay, and that's basically what most of the debt in the world is today. And it's 100% of all the government debt, because government produces nothing. It's a pure consumer. So all the government debt is consumption debt. So one thing, why are things as good as they are in the United States right now when I'm building a case for the Greater Depression? Well, one reason is all of this debt. Borrowing capital from the past and mortgaging capital in the future. Another important reason is that the US dollar, for a number of reasons, is the world's currency. It backs in central banks all the other currencies in the world to a greater or lesser degree. And the major export of the US, anybody know what the major export of the US is? Yeah, it's dollars. The U.S. is running about, I don't know what the latest, it's about, it varies from year to year, but since the late 70s, we've run a trade deficit. And it's around $600 to $800 billion per year. And the way it works is this. We ship out dollars to people. People want them, need them, because, they're accepted everywhere in the world. And, the Japanese send us Sonys, and the Germans send us Mercedes, and the Colombians send us cocaine. So they get dollars, and we get real goods. Hey, this is a great trade from the point of view of the U.S., but can this go on forever? And my argument is, this is why the standard of living in the U.S. has been artificially high, even though it's been dropping. We're down to 12th. It's because of debt, and it's because of the export of dollars in exchange for real goods. So when is this going to end, and how? Okay, I said we're going to have a depression. So let me give you a definition of a depression, because people often throw the word around, and what's a depression? That's like what happened in the 1930s. It's not a definition. I'll give you 3 definitions of what an economic depression is. 1, it's a period of time when most people's standard of living drops significantly. Well, that's like what happened in the 1930s. And, well, why does that happen? Why would most people's standard of living drop significantly? Because people are working and producing and new technologies are being developed. Well, give you a second definition of a depression. It's a period of time when distortions and misallocations of capital are liquidated. How does that happen? Distortions and misallocations of capital basically caused by government intervention in the marketplace. Taxes. Put a tax on something, people consume less of it than they would otherwise. They're discouraged from consuming there. Put a tax subsidy on something else, they consume more of it. So it's not natural. It's not what the market would do. It's something distorted by the government. Regulations do the same thing. They cause imbalances from what would naturally happen in the economy. Third thing, and the biggest thing, is inflation of the currency. That creates the biggest distortions in the market. And that leads me to the third definition of a depression. It's a period of time when the business cycle climaxes. What's the business cycle? It's a phenomenon, boom, bust, It's caused almost exclusively by currency inflation. When this fire hose of currency, it's not money actually, it's currency, different things, spewing forth from Washington and New York, it's directed in certain places. The government directs its spending in these places, causing a boom in those industries where it directs money, and if the money's cut off for some reason, all the buildings and workers that were employed, they're unemployed, it's a bust. They default on their bank loans and so forth. This happens across the economy. I'd like to give you a full explanation of the business cycle. I think you'd find it interesting, but no time for that. So, where are we right now? Those are the 3 definitions of a depression. And what we saw last time in this business cycle, the last bottom in the business cycle was in 2007, 8, and 9. And you'll remember, I hope you do, how scary it was and how close to the edge things came. When big brokerage firms started failing, and there were banks that were going to fail, and insurance companies like AIG that were going to fail, what happened? The government decided we can't let those things fail because the average guy out there is going to lose his insurance policy, he's going to lose his bank savings, the stock market will crash. We can't let that happen. Well, the market would have been liquidating at that point. All the real wealth, incidentally, go back to 2007, it's become a meme that quick action by the government saved things in 2007 through 10. But actually, we wouldn't have had that problem if the government hadn't been interfering in the economy in various ways and increasingly large ways before that, which caused this bust. Same thing happened, incidentally, in 1929, when the government was much less powerful than it is today. So, bringing it up to present time, the government created trillions of new currency units that they've been injecting into the economy. Trillions. And incidentally, this is why, especially in the last decade, 2 decades or more, but especially the last decade, the rich have been getting richer at an accelerating rate. Why is that? Because when this money is created, the people that are standing closer to the spigot get it first. And the people that are out in the hinterlands, they get the trickle down, whatever's left, after the big boys that are well connected get all that they want and think they want. So this is why the stock market, all these dollars have been created, but there hasn't been tremendous retail inflation yet. I mean, in the last 10 years, prices have probably gone up 50%, much more than the government admits. I mean, you can do your own cost of living analysis. But where's all that money going? Well, most of it's still sitting in the banking system, but a lot of it has filtered into the stock market, which is why we have a bubble stock market today. More of it's filtered into the bond market. With all-time low interest rates, we have a hyper bubble in the bond market, which is much bigger than the stock market, incidentally. Things go wrong with the bond market. It's much more serious than things go wrong with the stock market. And the real estate market, like here in Aspen, if you want a nice house, it depends on what you call nice, but it's going to, forget about anything less than 5. It's going to cost you 10, maybe 20, 30, 40, $50 million for a house in this little white bread mountain town. So what's going to happen next? And these ultra-low interest rates that they've engineered, the biggest debtor is the U.S. government, $20 trillion of official debt. But it's financing it ultra-low term, short term. The average interest rate on the $20 trillion is something like 2% per year, which is about a third of normal historic interest rates for borrowing in its most secure form. Interest rates go back up to the norm. Forget about go back up to the levels they were in the early 1980s. You remember the government was paying 15 to 17% to borrow then. If they just go up to the norm of like 6%, interest costs alone are going to go from $400 billion a year to $1.2 trillion. But the size of the debt's getting bigger every year. At some point, it becomes unsustainable. So it's hard to say when this bubble is going to break. Look at it this way. Look at it as being a hurricane. We entered the leading edge of the hurricane in 2007. Went through the leading edge in 7, 8, 9, 10. Since then, last 7 years, we've been in the eye of the storm. It's a gigantic storm. It's got a huge eye. But actions have consequences, and we're going to go through the trailing edge. And my argument is that the trailing edge is going to be much, much longer lasting, much, much worse, and much, much different than what you remember from back in 2008 and that. So that's going to be bad. And since they say 50% of the U.S. population is a net recipient of benefits from the government, which is manifestly bankrupt, and over 50% of the people literally live from paycheck to paycheck, have no money at all, things get bad and unemployment gets really bad and their pensions are wiped out. It's a formula for real distress, riots in the streets and that. So I'd say hold on to your hat over the next few years. Although it's relatively good times now. Hey, everybody here is pretty well-to-do. Stocks and bonds and real estate have treated us all pretty well. Won't last forever. I'm much more worried, though, frankly, about Western civilization itself. Most of what I read, I'm not a tech jock. I mean, I hate iPhones and that kind of stuff. They're just a nuisance. But most of what I read is either history, ancient history, believe it or not, or science. And it seems to me at this point that Western civilization itself is in pretty much the same shape as the Roman Empire was starting in the late 2nd century, 3rd century, moving into the 4th century. A lot of reasons why Rome fell. I could give you a speech on it. In fact, I wrote a 10,000-word paper that I got to turn into a book on my opinion on why Rome fell. But the barbarian invasions, maybe they weren't as bad for Rome as it might have been. Rome was already collapsing long before the barbarians overran the borders. But that's happening here in the U.S. And the problem is that just like the barbarians back then were not part of Roman civilization, although they didn't want to destroy it necessarily. They liked the soft life. But here, the barbarians, and it's worse in Europe, much worse in Europe than it is here in the United States. As usual, just like Europe peaked in 1913, the U.S. didn't peak until the 50s. Probably the same thing's happening with the collapse of Western civilization. It's that by the time Rome fell, nobody thought that it was worth defending. There were other reasons why it fell, other reasons, but that was a basic reason. That's what Gibbon's classic from the late 18th century, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, was all about. It was all about the Romans actually didn't think their civilization was worth defending. And that's pretty much the case in Europe now. You can see it now where they welcome the barbarians in from the Middle East and from Africa by the millions. And it'll turn into the tens of millions per year because every young African has a cell phone, I promise you. And, you know, the word spreads. And Europe's going to be overwhelmed. And these people are not part of Western civilization. They don't have the same values, they don't have the same belief, they don't have the same culture, they don't have the same religion, although I'm anti-religion, you know, I'm an atheist. But when Christianity collapses in Europe, which it is, people like religions, so they're going to pick up Islam. And Islam itself is, its basic values and everything are not just different, they're antithetical to Western civilization and the things it represents that I pointed out earlier. So this is really more important. But so how's this going to end? I was going to talk about Moore's Law. Now everybody knows Moore's Law is formulated during the 60s, and basically it says that computer power doubles every 18 months or something like that. But I'll make an argument that Moore's Law, in a different form, has actually been around since the early Paleolithic. And let's say it started with the conquest of fire, being able to create your own fire with friction or flint or whatever. And let's say that was 200,000 BC. And what's the next big innovation? Moore's Law was slower then. The next big doubling might have been 100,000 BC. These are really wild and rough numbers. When the spear was invented and men who were still basically in Africa learned how to knap flint. Now they had a spear. Standard of living went up, but it was 100,000 years before the standard of living doubled. And then let's jump forward and say the bow was invented 50,000 years ago. 200,000, 100,000. 50,000, the bow. Then let's go to after the Ice Age, about 12,000 years ago, discovery of agriculture, conquest of the horse, the pig, and all this type of thing. By the time you get into the Bronze Age, people are moving into the cities. So it is Moore's Law. It's just that the time frame, a little bit different with civilization. Time frame was hundreds of thousands of years, 10,000 tens of thousands of years, thousands of years. And now, by the time you get to 3000 BC with Sumer and Egypt, it's starting to accelerate hyperbolically, like that. The time between inventions is shorter, and there are more inventions. So by the time we get to the industrial age, things have moved from happening every 1,000 years, to every 100 years, every 10 years, every year. There's something new every year. And then there's something new every month and every week. And now it's several things a day. Okay, broad picture. And this is why I believe that Ray Kurzweil is right about, this is my own take. I think it's original. I haven't heard anybody else look at it that way. I think he's right. 20 years from now, and it's not just in computers. Yes, you got artificial intelligence, which once computers can think as fast as we can and then create their own computers, you know, it'll be will be left behind. And virtual reality, when that comes on, I mean, maybe we'll all step into our VR suits and never step out of them again. I mean, that could be a lot more fun than the real world. Space exploration, it's getting cheap, possible, private. But the big thing is biological tech and genetic engineering, which is actually going to change the way we look and are. I mean, personally, I hope it happens soon. I'm going to opt for Bruce Jenner's body just before he won the decathlon. And, you know, then after that, what happens is up to me, not Bruce. But I'll take his body. But the big one, bigger than any of these things, is nanotechnology. I mean, in basic theory, you know, nanotechnology is the creation of submicroscopic, nanometer scale machines controlled by nanometer scale supercomputers. And you throw pixie dust on this podium, it'll disassemble it into its 92 basic elements, all of which are probably here in this thing, and throw some more pixie dust on it, and it'll reassemble them into whatever they're programmed to do, anything. So this could happen in 20 years because of Moore's law for everything. So maybe you shouldn't worry about the collapse of civilization, because it'll be like in a dystopian science fiction novel where as long as there's enough capital left from someplace to keep these technologies advancing, it'll be okay. I mean, most of the people might be living in something that looks like Detroit today, but, you know, there might be pockets where this continues. So forget about the Greater Depression. Forget about the collapse of civilization. Maybe technology, and this is a technology conference, will wind up bailing us all out. So maybe you don't have to be prudent with your assets and save. Magic will happen. You know, and maybe these fools that say, oh, guaranteed income, give everybody $200,000 a year. So $200,000, give everybody $1 million a year. No, I think $1 billion a year is better with a guaranteed income. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I just think this. My bottom line on investing in the future is that things are going to get really, really weird and radical. I'm not even talking about what's going to happen in World War III and World War IV. But it's going to get really, really weird. And it's going to happen soon, like in 20 years. And even in our lifetimes, hey, 20 years goes by like a blink. So what should you do now? Well, try to put aside as much capital as you can so that you can insulate yourself from the bad things. That's why it's important not to be a grasshopper today. Try to put together some capital so you can insulate yourself from the bad things, and enough capital so you don't have to live down in the muck, so that you can, you know, live above ground like a rich Eloy. So that's what you want to do. Now, the question, how do you do it? Where do you allocate your assets to grow your capital? Because in a depression, everybody loses. Everybody loses. But some people lose a lot less than others. And the important thing to remember is that most of the real wealth in the world will still exist. It's just going to change ownership. So you want to think about, how am I going to position myself so that I own more, not less, like the Capitacensi out there. Okay, that's all I got to say. And has that been half an hour? So anybody got any questions or want to talk about something? Yes, sir.
I got a question about, what's your opinion on, do you think asteroid mining is at all practicable, and obviously would that have any implications for the
Yes, it is. Asteroid mining, is it practical? Well, yes, that's going to happen. Because I'm in the mining business, the finance part of it, but I know a lot about it. And the Earth has been pretty well cherry-picked. Well, nanotechnology will solve that problem here on the Earth. But yes, asteroid mining, I mean, it's well known that many of the asteroids are full of heavy metals. So, yeah, it's going to happen. Now, what are the economics? Well, there are advantages. Power from the sun, no gravity, but it's not near term. So you don't want to, look, you never want to invest in a science project because most science projects don't work out and they don't make money even if they do work out. So I would not try to invest in asteroid mining, but I'm sure 20 years from now that most of the metals are going to be mined in the asteroids, and they'll get them down to Earth, assuming you even want to get them down to Earth. I mean, why come back to this planet when there are probably much better places that we can create? So I'm an optimist. I'm not a pessimist. Lynn?
Yeah, so what capital would you recommend putting aside to insulate ourselves? Do you have any recommendations?
Yeah, what kind of investments would you make to preserve and grow your capital? I'm afraid that in today's world, because inflation is going to explode in the next few years all over the world, because it's not just the Americans, it's the Europeans, the Chinese, the Japanese, and all these little countries that have been creating currencies by the boatload. But then again, we might have a deflationary collapse where, let's say there's a $1 billion bond default. What happened to the $1 billion? Well, it was all credit. It vanishes, but it's $1 billion that people thought they had. So you're going to have inflation or deflation. I think it's going to be inflation. What should you do? I would buy gold. It's reasonable price now, not a bargain, the way it was in 2002, when it was actually cheaper in real terms at $250 than it was in 1971 at $35 an ounce. It was cheaper in real terms. This stuff happens. So it's reasonable to buy gold now. But I think what you got to, and I hate to say things like this, because then when people try to speculate and they don't really know what they're doing, not an expert in the field, and they're not really grooved into the markets, everybody's going to force to be a speculator in the future. Guess what's going to go up, what's going to be promoted. But that's what happens when inflation gets crazy. All great inflations, people are forced to be speculators. You can't invest because it kills productivity in the society. Nobody wants to get into a business because it might be taxed or regulated to death so you have to learn to speculate. And this is a real reason why most people lose most of what they have, because they misallocate their capital. I'd say buy gold, buy silver, and learn to speculate. But that last bit of advice is very, very dangerous.
Are you talking about those like coins, like eagles?
Yeah. In your physical gold, in your own possession. I don't want to trust somebody else with gold. The whole point of having gold is you don't have to trust anybody. It's the only financial asset that's not simultaneously somebody else's liability. So that's why you want it as a base, and you build on that foundation, other stuff. So that's bottom line of my, I wouldn't own a bond. No way would I own a bond today. There are certificates of guaranteed confiscation. I don't want to be in the stock market, although I think it's going higher. You want to play chicken? I don't really want to, although I'm still in the stock market, certain areas of it. Well, it's a Bitcoin cryptocurrency mining company. It's not public. It's a private company. Can't invest in that. I mentioned Hive, which is the only currently public cryptocurrency, Hive blockchain technologies. I don't want to recommend that. It came out at 60 cents at the beginning of the week. It's already hit 220. So does that mean it's going to $10? Maybe, but I don't want to recommend things that could have high-tech big wreck. I'm just warning you that I think there's going to be lots of those Lots of blockchain companies coming out. Most of them will be crap, but a few of them will be the next Microsoft. So keep your eyes open. That's the type of thing to look at. Yes, sir.
When you talk about capital, how about physically owning your house or your property that you live in? Do you recommend that?
Physically doing what with your house?
Owning your property.
Oh. Yeah, real estate. Okay, real estate. Look, there's a problem with real estate. Real estate's been very, very good to me. So, but my opinion, just an opinion, is that the great post-World War II real estate bull market, which was fostered by the government, you know, people used to consider their houses like their cars or like a suit of clothes, just longer life. It was a consumer good. It depreciated over time. It fell apart over time. So houses weren't considered investments, and they're not investments. But I think the bubble, which is based on debt and favorable government tax treatments of real estate, I think it's coming to an end. And it floats on a sea of debt. Now, of course, if you get a long-term 30-year mortgage at 3 or 4, 5% or whatever they are now, maybe that'll be inflated out of existence. So your house goes down in value in real terms, but your mortgage drops faster. But you're speculating. But it could be an interesting speculation.
Speculated like buying coins, you got to pay the money for them.
Yeah.
Same with the house, you don't get a mortgage on it. You drop 100, 200 grand on it and buy a house or a piece of property.
Well, you buy a house, you can generally get a mortgage for, you know, I don't know how many, I mean, depends on your banker, whether it's 50% or 100%.
Why do you want to pay interest?
Why? Because the currency is being inflated and losing value at a faster rate than the interest. In other words, right now you can finance your house at 4%, but the dollar is losing value at 5%. And in the future, I think it'll be 10, 15, 20, 30%. So the mortgage is it'll be like guys that took out mortgages in Argentine pesos. They pay it back with the cost of a pack of cigarettes. It's a speculation. Probably a good one. But yes, sir.
Who's your best guess of the timeline when really ships are hitting the fan?
Oh, I'm surprised it didn't happen several years ago. I really am. I mean, I've underrated the power of the government. I think it's happening. I think it's coming unglued now. Little signs here and there, type of signs we saw back in the early part of 2007. So, I don't know. Things will fall apart any time from this month, Monday morning, to 6 months from now. I hate to make predictions like that because I may have to eat my words with a fork and spoon. But they've done everything they can. They've cut interest rates to 0 and less, which I thought was metaphysically impossible. They've printed up trillions of dollars of currency. Well, maybe they can print up quadrillions. I don't think so. I think it's coming unglued now, but we'll see. Just an opinion. Nobody knows. Because the average American knows absolutely nothing about economics, nothing about history. So the average guy in this country is going to be taken by surprise. And he's going to look to the government to kiss everything and make it better. He's going to want that universal basic income. Boy, this is going to be a disaster. Sir?
At what point, like, the price of gold will reflect that the things are coming apart, the wheels are coming off, like when it hits like 2000 or it's...
I don't know. Look, here's how you may have to figure it. There's about 6 billion ounces of gold in the world that have been mined since the dawn of history. Guess. It's approximate. The U.S. government owns 265 million ounces of gold. So, if the dollar was to be backed by gold again, how many dollars would that be? I don't know how many dollars. 10 trillion outside the U.S. Divide 265 million into 10 trillion. What is that? 4,000? Or is it 40,000? Back all the dollars. It's impossible. The dollar is going to wind up like the Brazilian real. That's what's going to happen. But the problem is the Brazilian real or the Argentine peso, it only affects the people in that country because the currency is worthless outside the country. The US dollar is everywhere, so people everywhere are going to be devastated.
If all else fails, we'll return to a gold standard.
Yeah, that's what's going to happen. I'd put money on that. So the question is what will gold be worth in relative terms? Let me guess, $5,000 or $10,000. It'll be a bubble. There'll be a bubble in gold, panic-driven bubble. And I hope that my tip, I'm so sorry Time magazine doesn't really exist anymore, because it was a great contrary indicator. I was going to use as my tip-off when Time magazine had a picture of a golden bear tearing apart the New York Stock Exchange. And then I'd say, this is the time to sell gold and buy New York Stock Exchange stocks. But Time isn't there anymore, so how am I going to know? Well, I'll have to find some kind of an alternative indicator similar. I think they still publish Business Week. They're probably even worse than Time.
But you see a time when we are going to go down to the store with silver, dollar, or gold. There won't be a dollar, just it's legal tender.
Yeah, you're not going to, yeah, currency is going to go out of existence. It's going out of existence all over the world today. They're pushing for that. So what are you going to use? Oh, you're going to use, everybody's going to have one of these ridiculous smartphones. And, you know, you'll use your PayPal with FedCoin, whatever. Or smart people will have some gold and silver. And yeah, it's possible. This is science fiction, dystopian science fiction, which is the best kind, incidentally, I think. It's the fun kind. Makes the best movies. Anybody else got any thoughts? Oh, yes, ma'am. 3 minutes. Oh, 3 minutes. Good.
For gold to really rally, you have to have participation at some point. You know, from March onwards, and I see this more and more, emotional energy seems to be in crypto. And, you know, people are getting excited about that, and they're getting their baby boomer parents to be excited about that. Who's going to be buying gold stocks?
Right, I understand. You're talking about nobody's excited about gold, everybody's excited about crypto. So when are things going to change? Well, I think things are going to change. Why? Because the government is going to really, really get involved in crypto. And it's going to confuse people and so forth. And crypto is going to, the good thing about crypto is that when you buy Bitcoin or any of these things, you start out, why am I trading the dollar is nothing but an on-backed cryptocurrency that's being inflated, which Bitcoin can't be. So, and people are going to look at this and they're going to say, well, what's the history of money? And what's monetary theory? And they're going to start looking into this. And when people do, I'm convinced they're going to say, gold. The only financial asset that's not somebody else's liability, the Aristotelian reasons why it makes the best money. So the boom in cryptocurrencies is going to inevitably draw a lot of attention back to real money, which is gold. So it's a good thing. And meanwhile, as the speculative bubble, and it is a bubble, these cryptocurrencies grows and becomes a bigger bubble, I hope, you know, you can make a lot of money and then dump them all and buy gold. Because like I said yesterday, I mean, if you own too much Bitcoin, you're going to find that it's going to be eventually it's going to be like owning a cell phone from 10 years ago. Interesting, but worth nothing. That's going to happen to Bitcoin. It's going to be high-tech, big wreck. Remember that. And this is technology. Technology advances, changes, old technologies become worthless. That'll happen. So that's why this is speculative. It's
Going on the speculation, you see Bitcoin or any of the crypto 5, 10 years.
I don't know what's going to happen 10 years from now. That's science fiction territory. Like I said earlier, literally science fiction territory. I'm just predicting the Greater Depression. You know, that's all. and the collapse of Western civilization. Oh, okay, okay. Thank you very much, y'all.